Most people think the Benny Hill Show disappeared because audiences simply moved on. But that isn't the full story. Behind one unforgettable scene, growing public criticism, changing television standards, and a wave of unexpected backlash created a turning point few fans saw coming. What looked like just another comedy sketch soon became part of a much bigger debate that changed British television forever. So what really happened, and why did one of TV's biggest stars suddenly lose his place on the air? Before people argued about the Benny Hill Show, Benny Hill was one of the biggest comedy stars in the world. Millions of families sat in front of their TVs every week, waiting to see what funny character he would play next. His fast-moving comedy, silly faces, catchy music, and famous chase scenes made people laugh without needing many words. His show was sold to dozens of countries, turning him into an international television star. But Benny Hill's success did not happen overnight. Born as Alfred Hawthorne Hill in England, he loved making people laugh from a young age. Before becoming famous, he worked several small jobs while trying to build a career in entertainment. He studied the comedians he admired and slowly created his own unique style. Instead of telling long jokes, he mixed physical comedy, funny costumes, music, and quick visual gags. That style became something audiences had never seen before. As the years passed, The Benny Hill Show became one of Britain's most popular television programs. Every new episode attracted huge audiences, and viewers looked forward to the show's familiar mix of comedy sketches, funny songs, and unforgettable characters. Benny seemed to have discovered the perfect formula. Ratings stayed strong, broadcasters were happy, and his popularity continued to spread around the world. Yet while many fans loved the show, television itself was beginning to change. New generations of viewers wanted different kinds of comedy. Writers and critics started asking whether older comedy styles still fit modern audiences. At first, these questions seemed small. Benny Hill was still one of television's biggest names, and few people believed his position was in danger. Then another problem slowly appeared. Some sketches that had once been treated as harmless fun began receiving closer attention. Viewers who had laughed at them years earlier now looked at the same jokes differently. Newspapers, television critics, and cultural commentators started discussing whether some parts of the show reflected outdated ideas. The conversations grew louder with every passing year. Benny Hill himself rarely entered these public debates. He preferred letting his work speak for itself instead of answering every criticism. But silence could not stop the changing mood around his program. What had once been seen as simple entertainment was now becoming part of a much larger conversation about comedy, television, and changing social values. Few people realized it at the time, but the show's biggest challenge was no longer finding laughs. It was keeping up with a world that was changing faster than anyone expected. And before long, one particular scene would become a powerful symbol in that growing debate, pushing the show closer to a turning point that would change everything. For years, The Benny Hill Show followed a familiar pattern. Fast music played, the jokes came one after another, and the audience expected the famous chase scenes that had become the show's trademark. But as the late 1980s arrived, one sketch in particular became a symbol of everything critics believed was wrong with the program. It wasn't because of a single offensive line or one shocking moment. Instead, it represented a style of comedy that many people felt no longer matched the times. The sketch included the kind of humor viewers had seen for years: Benny chasing women, exaggerated flirting, and jokes built around physical appearance. For loyal fans, it seemed like classic Benny Hill. But for many others, especially television critics and media commentators, it reinforced old stereotypes that they believed television should leave behind. Newspapers began writing more stories about the show's humor. Some articles argued that British comedy was changing while The Benny Hill Show was standing still. Around the same time, newer comedy programs were becoming popular by using different styles of humor, focusing more on clever dialogue, satire, and everyday situations instead of slapstick and visual gags. The criticism didn't appear overnight. It had been building for years, but this scene became an easy example for people who wanted to show how much television had changed. The discussion spread beyond newspapers and into living rooms, workplaces, and television offices. Viewers found themselves asking the same question: was Benny Hill still making people laugh, or had the world simply moved on? Not everyone agreed with the criticism. Many fans defended Benny, saying his comedy had always been light-hearted and never intended to hurt anyone. They argued that the show should be judged in the context of the time it was created. Around the world, millions still enjoyed reruns, proving that the program continued to have a loyal audience. Even so, television executives could not ignore the growing pressure. Broadcasters were paying closer attention to changing audience tastes, advertiser expectations, and the direction they wanted their networks to take. A show that had once been considered one of their greatest successes was now being viewed through a very different lens. Looking back today, it's difficult to point to one single scene and say, this alone ended the show. The cancellation resulted from several factors coming together: changing cultural attitudes, evolving comedy styles, and declining support from decision-makers. But that memorable sketch became the image many people associated with the show's decline, making it a lasting part of television history. Behind the scenes, executives were already asking difficult questions about the future of the Benny Hill Show. Benny himself could sense that something was changing, but he may not have realized just how close the end had become. Just a few years earlier, it would have been hard to imagine the Benny Hill Show facing serious trouble. The program had entertained millions, earned strong ratings, and become one of Britain's best-known television exports. But by the late 1980s, the conversation around the show had changed. The biggest challenge was no longer whether people recognized Benny Hill. It was whether his style of comedy still fit what many viewers and broadcasters wanted. Television audiences were changing. Younger viewers were discovering new comedians whose humor relied more on clever conversations, satire, and everyday situations than on slapstick, exaggerated chases, and visual gags. As new shows gained popularity, older formats naturally faced tougher competition. At the same time, critics became more vocal. Some argued that certain recurring jokes on the Benny Hill Show reflected outdated ideas about gender and relationships. Others felt the comedy repeated the same formula for too many years without evolving. These opinions appeared in newspaper reviews, magazine articles, and television discussions, helping shape the public debate. Still, the criticism did not represent everyone. Benny Hill continued to have a large and loyal fan base. Many viewers believed the show was never meant to be taken as a serious statement about society. To them, it was simply fast-paced, exaggerated comedy designed to make people laugh. They felt critics were judging older entertainment by newer standards. This growing divide placed television executives in a difficult position. They had to balance the loyalty of longtime fans with the expectations of changing audiences, advertisers, and the network's future direction. As competition increased, every programming decision became more important. Behind closed doors, discussions about the show's future became more serious. Executives reviewed viewing trends and considered how the network's lineup should evolve. Although the Benny Hill Show still had supporters, concerns about its long-term direction continued to grow. Benny Hill rarely responded publicly to the criticism. Friends and colleagues often described him as a private person who preferred focusing on his work rather than debating headlines. That quiet approach, however, meant others shaped much of the public conversation about his show. Looking back, historians generally agree that no single protest, review, or sketch ended the Benny Hill Show on its own. Instead, it was a combination of changing audience tastes, shifting cultural expectations, and programming decisions that gradually led to its cancellation. The famous scene became a symbol of that change, but it was only one piece of a much larger story. As these pressures continued to build, the network reached a decision that stunned many fans. After decades of success, one of television's biggest comedy stars was about to hear news that would bring an extraordinary era to an unexpected end. After months of growing debate, the question everyone feared was finally answered. ITV decided not to continue the Benny Hill Show. To many fans, the announcement came as a complete shock. How could one of the most successful comedy programs in British television history come to an end after entertaining audiences for so many years? The truth is that the decision was not based on one sketch or one complaint alone. By the late 1980s, television executives believed the entertainment world was changing. They wanted programs that matched the tastes of newer audiences, and they felt comedy was moving in a different direction. At the same time, ratings were no longer as strong as they had been during the show's biggest years. While millions still watched, the program no longer dominated television the way it once had. Another factor was increasing competition. New comedy shows were attracting younger viewers with fresh ideas and different styles of humor. Networks had limited space in their schedules, and every program had to prove it could keep attracting large audiences. Executives believed it was time to invest in newer productions, even if that meant saying goodbye to a long-running favorite. For Benny Hill, the decision was deeply personal. Friends later said he was disappointed because entertaining people had been the center of his life for decades. He never expected that a show which had become famous around the world would end in this way. Despite his success, Benny remained a private man. Instead of publicly attacking the network or arguing with critics, he largely stayed out of the spotlight. Many fans hoped another broadcaster would quickly bring the show back. There were discussions about possible new opportunities, but nothing restored the program to the position it had once enjoyed. The television landscape had already shifted, and networks were focused on creating content they believed reflected the future rather than the past. Even after the cancellation, the debate continued. Supporters argued that Benny Hill had become an easy target during a period of changing social attitudes. Critics responded that television must evolve with society and that every program should be judged by the standards of its time. Both sides had passionate opinions, and the discussion has never completely disappeared. What is clear is that the Benny Hill Show did not vanish because of a single moment. It ended because several factors came together: changing viewer preferences, stronger competition, evolving cultural expectations, and business decisions made by television executives. The famous scene became a lasting symbol, but it was only one chapter in a much larger story. For Benny Hill, however, the end of the show marked the beginning of a much quieter life. Away from the cameras, one of television's biggest stars faced his most difficult chapter, a chapter that many fans knew very little about. When the Benny Hill Show came to an end, many people expected Benny Hill to quickly return with another hit series. After all, he had spent decades making millions laugh and had become one of the most recognized faces on television. But life after the cancellation was much quieter than anyone imagined. Instead of appearing on television every week, Benny largely stepped away from the public eye. Friends described him as a private and humble man who never lived like a flashy celebrity. Despite earning significant success during his career, he enjoyed simple pleasures, kept a small circle of close friends, and preferred a quiet lifestyle over constant attention. Even though the show was no longer being produced, it continued to find audiences around the world through reruns. In many countries, viewers who had never seen the original broadcasts discovered Benny's comedy for the first time. His physical humor, expressive facial reactions, and fast-paced sketches remained entertaining to many fans, proving that his work still had international appeal. However, the end of the show also affected Benny personally. People close to him later said he missed performing and creating new comedy. While he occasionally discussed future ideas, no major television comeback ever happened. The industry had changed, and the opportunities that once seemed endless were no longer there. In his final years, Benny's health began to decline. Doctors reportedly advised him to improve his lifestyle and consider medical treatment for heart-related problems. Like many people, he planned to deal with those issues later. Tragically, that later never came. On April 20, 1992, Benny Hill was found dead at his home in Teddington, England. He was 68 years old. His death shocked fans across Britain and around the world. Many who had grown up watching his comedy were saddened to learn that one of television's greatest entertainers had passed away so quietly. Following his death, tributes poured in from fellow comedians, actors, and longtime viewers. Even some critics who had disagreed with his style of humor acknowledged his remarkable influence on television comedy. There was little debate about one fact: Benny Hill had left a lasting mark on entertainment history. Today, his story is remembered as both inspiring and bittersweet. He rose from humble beginnings to become an international comedy icon, enjoyed extraordinary success, faced changing public opinion, and spent his final years away from the spotlight. His journey reminds us that fame can change quickly, even for the biggest stars. But perhaps the most surprising part of Benny Hill's story isn't how his show ended. It's how people continue to argue about his legacy more than 3 decades later. Was he simply a comedian whose style belonged to another era, or was he an entertainer whose work is still misunderstood today? That question keeps his name alive, even now. More than 30 years after Benny Hill's death, people are still talking about his work. That is something very few entertainers achieve. While many television shows fade from memory, The Benny Hill Show continues to spark conversations among fans, critics, and television historians. Some remember it as one of the funniest comedy programs ever made. Others see it as a reminder of how comedy and society have changed over time. Supporters point to the incredible success of the show. At its peak, it was watched by millions of people and sold to more than 100 countries. Benny's style of physical comedy crossed language barriers, allowing people from different cultures to enjoy the same jokes. His famous chase scenes, funny expressions, and unforgettable yakety sax theme became instantly recognizable around the world. Critics, however, continue to debate parts of the show's humor. They argue that some sketches reflected attitudes that many modern audiences no longer accept. As television evolved, expectations about what should appear on screen also changed. Because of this, The Benny Hill Show is often discussed not only as entertainment but also as an example of how comedy changes with the times. What makes Benny Hill's story so fascinating is that there was never one single scene that took the show off the air for good. While one sketch is often mentioned in documentaries, articles, and online discussions as a symbol of the controversy, the show's cancellation resulted from many factors working together. Changing audience tastes, new competition, shifting cultural expectations, and programming decisions all played important roles. The famous scene became part of the story because it represented those broader changes, not because it alone ended the series. Today, television experts often use Benny Hill's career to show how difficult it can be for long-running programs to adapt as audiences change. A format that feels fresh in one decade may seem outdated in another. That doesn't erase its earlier success, but it does explain why even hugely popular shows sometimes come to an end. For new generations discovering Benny Hill through clips and reruns, the experience can be very different. Some simply enjoy the fast-paced slapstick and classic comedy. Others watch with curiosity, trying to understand why the show was once so popular and why it later became controversial. Both reactions are part of the program's lasting legacy. One thing is certain: Benny Hill changed television comedy forever. Whether people celebrate his work or criticize parts of it, his influence on entertainment history is impossible to ignore. Few comedians have made such a global impact, and even fewer continue to inspire debate decades after their final performance. In the end, The Benny Hill Show wasn't remembered only for how it ended. It was remembered because it captured a moment in television history when comedy, culture, and audience expectations were all changing at once. Benny Hill's career serves as a reminder that success can be extraordinary, but staying relevant in a changing world is one of entertainment's greatest challenges.